There's this myth of pressure. This is maybe the first and most important part of chapter 1 in the book, which is that most people think that some people rise to the occasion. Some people do better under pressure. Would you agree? Yeah, there are people who do better under pressure. I hate to break it to you, but it's a myth. It's wrong. It's not true. Pressure diminishes our thinking ability, our ability to manage emotions, our ability to retrieve memory. And if you look at in chapter 1, there's a whole section on how it diminishes creativity, teamwork, and on and on. In sport, we know no NBA player shoots a better free throw when they're under pressure at the end of the game than their season average. Same with clutch hitting in baseball, and I could go on and on. Now, this may seem like a negative message. It's not. What it's meant to say is the data tells us that nobody does better under pressure. So what's the aha about that? Well, what that should mean to you is that you have to manage it differently. You got to try and minimize pressure's effect on you. That's very different. So from the 12,000 group, here's what we found. Even this group, the top 10%, they didn't overperform in their pressure moments. What they did is pressure affected them less. And there were I want to leave you with 3 specific things that they did especially well. Number 1, they were able to receive criticism without becoming defensive. I mean, all of us are in those moments when we're getting feedback. Can you still sit there and take it as a gift, as opposed to get into yeah buts? Number 2, they could freely admit to making a mistake. We know that increases source credibility. The moment you admit a mistake, the next thing you say jumps up in source credibility. Best example for me is I was lucky enough to do some training with the mental training coach for the Chicago Bulls when that 1990s team was together. Now, you guys might not be basketball fans, but the story really translates. That's the team of, who was on that team? Michael Jordan. Who else? Scottie Pippen. Who was the coach? Phil Jackson. So whether you know these guys or not, it's not important, but here's what matters. People will tell you that that was actually not the most talented team of their generation. They lacked a big man. They had this Canadian stiff named Bill Wennington. Some of you guys might remember him. I'm Canadian, by the way, so I can say that. Here's what that team did especially well. The game would be over. The team would go into the dressing room. The door would close. The media's on the outside. And who in that dressing room would be the first to admit a mistake from that game? The Canadian. Nice answer. That's great. By the way, she said holy, S-H-I-T, and then the Canadian, so I'm liking this one right here. Who do you think was the first to admit a mistake in that moment? The coach. Absolutely. The coach would come in and not say, Rodman, what were you doing? Or Pippen. He'd come in and say, I should have called a timeout, or I should have changed up the defense. Whatever it was, it didn't really matter. But what did that allow everyone else in that room to do? The same thing. You know what they were? Whether they were the most talented or not, what I do know is this. They were the most highly aggressive learning organization. They won 6 championships because they were constantly learning. That's some of our data. We find that those top 10%, they extract, get this stat, they extract 3 to 5 times more information from the same opportunity to learn as an average performer. That's incredible. Which is, in this moment, in this morning, how many of you are really sitting there saying, yeah, I'm going to take that, I'm going to take action on that idea from all the fantastic speakers we had? And that differentiates you as a top 10% performer. How many times when we have so much going on, too much to do, too little time, too few resources, and we get tunnel vision? It's just about getting what we need done. Especially for managers and leaders, this is a huge one. Because if you want to increase engagement, these are the moments that matter most. And I'll tell you what I mean exactly. Because under time pressure, we have something called inattentional blindness, where we miss things. And the best example for me is, in the book, again, we did this, you want to go forward, guys? Where Andrew Jackson, we interviewed, and he said, I'm in a meeting and I find out a new project gets piled on top, right? I can feel overwhelmed by the pressure. I'm sure you've never felt that before, right? Go to the next slide, guys. But this is the part that was interesting. He said, I could go back to my office and not notice a dead body lying on the floor. Now, that might be a bit extreme, but the point is that we can miss so much. Most of us don't know this, but we actually make an assessment of the pressure moment we're facing, and we say this is a crisis or this is a challenge. This is a threat, crisis, or this is an adventure, a challenge. We don't know it, but we do that. And here's the most amazing part. When you see it as a crisis, your smooth muscle, it really affects the brain and our body. The smooth muscle in your blood vessels tighten up, and blood starts to pool in your blood vessels, and it doesn't get to your body or your brain. That's why we feel so fatigued at the end of the day. That's why we get tension headaches. That's why we have trouble thinking clearly in the afternoon. It's one of the big reasons. Just because we're seen as a threat, a crisis, and we're kind of backpedaling. Whereas we can see that same situation as a challenge, as an adventure. And when we do, we have a change in this noradrenaline-adrenaline ratio where our vessels now dilate. Blood doesn't pool, it gets to where it needs to go. We don't feel as tired. So we actually have a huge impact. For many years, we didn't believe that smooth muscles we had any influence on, and now we know we do. Let me ask you this. Think to your pressure situation that you identified earlier. I'm not saying you have to believe this, but how could you see it as a challenge? Just in your mind, you don't have to say it out loud. How could you see it as a challenge? This is something we do with athletes, with business people, in our training programs. How could you see it as a challenge? I'll give you a great one. See it as an opportunity to learn and grow. That alone. If you can see every opportunity as an opportunity to extract 3 to 5 times more information, wow, that's how you become an aggressive learner, and it changes your physiology, it changes your brain. And how might you be more effective, and how might people perceive you, go to the next slide, guys, perceive you differently if you approach with that, hey, this is a challenge, an opportunity, as opposed to a crisis, a threat.